Welcome to TeleGeography Explains the Internet, the show that explores the business behind all of the ways humans stay connected around the world. I'm your host, Greg Bryan, and my guest today is my colleague, Paul Brodsky. I brought Paul on to discuss our most recent voice report. Yes, a report all about voice traffic. But in talking about it, we couldn't help but get into really a whole lot more. We talk about the whole history of telecoms and how voice and internet networks are similar and yet very different, and how that fact is impacting voice traffic and revenue. It's not often on the show that we get into histories reaching back a century or more, but this context is really useful for understanding the changes in how humans are communicating here in 2023. So we talk about the cash cow that voice once was and what has happened to that now, and the history of the over-the-top and VoIP technologies and how they have disrupted that market. Of course, we could not leave out mobile, as Paul came to TeleGeography from a mobile provider. Now, one small note is that due to technical problems, and by technical problems I mean human error, and by human I mean me, we used the wrong mic for much of this recording. But I think our excited voices enthusiastically talking about this stuff should shine through that small technical glitch and be good enough for you to listen to our conversation in full. So off to Paul. Welcome to the podcast, Paul, at long last. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, Greg. Happy to be here.
All right. Excellent. So I'm going to continue asking questions that I sort of know the answer to. But, Paul, tell us who you are and what you do at TeleGeography.
Well, you know my name, right? My title is, Senior Research Manager here at TeleGeography.
Sounds right.
Yeah, I've been here about as long as you have, Greg.
Yeah, so 17 some odd years.
A couple of great years.
Believe it or not. Yeah.
In practice, I research telecommunications infrastructure regionally. I focus on Africa and parts of Europe and the Middle East. I keep track of submarine cable developments, internet bandwidth deployments in those parts of the world, to enterprise services and cloud services in those parts of the world as well. And Despite all of that, I
asked you on to talk about voice.
That's right. That's right, which I'm happy to do. But I also work on the voice report, which is sort of the original and frankly the reason for existence.
The raison d'etre, which I didn't pronounce properly. Yeah. Sorry to our French speakers, but going back to I think it's 1989, which was the very first thing that was TeleGeography.
That's right. Tele, meaning distance.
Yes,
you knew that,
exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And I mean, the year 1989 is, it's significant in the sense that it really gets pre-internet. Well, pre-World Wide Web, I suppose, right?
Right. There's ARPANET and university systems and whatnot, but
they were not.
Tim Berners-Lee had not made the World Wide Web, which is what made the internet consumable more.
Right. It was not really a commercial proposition back then, which means that, if people wanted to communicate at a distance,
there we go.
Did you get that?
Teleport.
That's it. There were, we had very limited options, right? If you had a friend in another country, and again, just about all of our research is restricted to international, so bandwidth, internet traffic flows, voice. We focus on the international cross-border side of things, but so back then, if you wanted to communicate with someone in another country, you could write a letter or maybe send a telegram, right?
For a long time, that lasted longer than people think.
Yeah. Or pick up the telephone, which was this device literally hardwired into your home office. Wait for a dial tone and punch in a bunch of numbers, or if you're really old, you spun the dial.
Ooh,
right?
And the telephone company owned that device. It did not even belong to you.
No, you would rent it. You would rent it.
You had to tell them where you wanted it.
But I think at one point they introduced different colored telephones.
Fancy.
Yeah. Like what are the Ford say about the Model T? You get any color you want, as long as it's black.
Yeah.
I think for a while, the
all phones were black. Yeah, absolutely. And then they got really mad. They came up with something called like hush a phone to like quiet all the receptionists talking, and AT&T said, "You're adding things to our devices." No, thank you.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. Yeah, I mean, innovation was like, how long a cord do you want connecting your the receiver, that is the thing you hold in your hand, to the device. Yeah, I mean, back again. So circa 1989, that's really all that telecommunications was, practically speaking.
From a business standpoint, at that point, the internet would have been only for government and university types and extreme nerds.
It had not been commercialized at all. So, yeah.
Have you been to Epcot, Paul?
I've never been to Epcot.
Okay, so you know the big ball, though, right? The giant golf ball looking thing was sponsored by AT&T, going way back to 1983 or whatever. And it's a ride about communications. Right? And there is a scene where it's a dark ride, kind of like moving dioramas, right? Where you go through, and there are these like Victorian women at a patchboard with patch cords, right? And Pennsylvania 65000. Right? So how does that work?
Wow, I'm not that old. Come on. Yeah, I mean the old the way telephone systems worked was based on something called circuit switched technology, which is exactly as it sounds. I mean, the telephone is, I don't know, I guess they're still out there. Some of them are. It's an electrical device. I mean, it's a it's not plugged into.
You're speaking. Your sound waves push like a diaphragm inside the telephone, which turns into electrical signal.
Yeah.
And that circuit has to connect all the way to the other end.
Well, yeah. I mean, and that device is like there's an electrical plug that RJ11, I guess they call it, right? But that's copper. It's a copper. I mean, it's carrying electrical current. Right. I think is it 40 volts DC?
So you have to have a complete circuit, whether you're calling down the street or across the world. There has to be which is really resource intense.
Right? Yeah. So right. So if let's say you're calling your next door neighbor. You would pick up the telephone, and a circuit would be established between your device and the telephone company's central office, which might be down the road or in town or maybe a couple of miles away.
Look for it in your neighborhood. You still have one, probably. There's a brick building, probably owned by one of the what we call R-Box in the business, in case you're not familiar, right? Or if you're in another country, just your local telephone provider.
And you know what? Those things were built like bomb shelters because, the whole other conversation. I mean, basically, the companies were incentivized to put a lot of money into their infrastructure for a variety of reasons in order to guarantee universal service. And I think the government was basically allow them to charge a certain amount that would allow them to return a nice handsome dividend to their shareholders on a regular basis.
It's kind of like pre-regulation banking too. It's like guaranteed returns, they're very low risk, but it's like
And the government saw that as a social benefit, right? And everyone, in exchange for universal service, like everyone, no matter if you're living in a big city or out in a very rural area, you would have a telephone where you could communicate with someone anywhere.
Because just like in what we've talked about on the show a few times, in the local access, broadband, whatever kind of worlds, the economics of stretching wires all the way to sparsely populated places, just never going to work out, right? So you make a deal, like AT&T makes a deal with the government, say basically, let us be a monopoly, and we'll make sure that we cover everybody in the country, which would never make sense from a private company standpoint.
Right, and there was some fairly generous cross-subsidization going on, where they would basically charge a lot of money to their business customers, and they would charge a whole lot of money for long distance. Domestic long distance, international long distance was outrageously expensive. But a lot of that money went into subsidizing exactly what you're talking about, Greg, like laying, a copper twisted pair out to, somewhere in a really remote location that otherwise they could never get any kind of economic return on it. I just found one of the just really fascinating things to me about this is just the intertwining of technology and economics, and social policy.
Right.
Things were, in many ways, a lot simpler back then, and that you had one operator effectively. There were some smaller regional operators, but effectively it was.
Well, there's still hundreds of ILECs. We won't get into that whole history of the United States.
Yeah,
but yeah.
And then and that pattern was the case in I think most of the developed world as well.
Right.
I mean, in many countries, in the U.S., there was a publicly traded company called AT&T. It's still around, right? But they were basically a government sanctioned monopoly.
It's kind of still around. Really, what we call AT&T now is SBC, just for the record. But yes.
Everybody from AT&T go listen to this. I'm going to get in trouble. I'm going to get a phone call or I'm going to get a letter. But in other countries, it was the phone company. It wasn't even a company.
Often the post, we call them PTTs because it was the post and telecom company, right?
Yeah.
So
post telegraph and telephone.
Yeah,
it was
exactly. Yeah.
It was like it was a public utility, just like electricity or water or any stuff like that. Yeah.
But I want to go back to as a technological concept. So the woman in the Victorian dress plugs your call, has completed the circuit. She finds where that call is going. She plugs it into the big circuit board in front of her.
Yeah.
How does that relate to what we now call the internet? I mean, in a fundamental level, you're still doing some of the same thing, right? You're making a connection between your computer and the computer accessing or to send an email or whatever too, right?
Well, there's switching going on, no doubt, right? But there's some fundamental differences. Again, with circuit switching, think of an electrical circuit, which is quite literally is what it was, right? I mean, you want to connect point A to point B. You need some series of wires to connect A and B and complete an electrical circuit, so that humans can sort of we can talk, and those diaphragms and the receivers can vibrate and create an electrical circuit, which goes between A and B.
I mean, the soup can with the string is not that far off, right?
It's not, right? It's really not, right? And anyway, that's called circuit switching because you've got an electrical circuit connecting the two. And in the case of the ladies in the Victorian dresses, they're in front of a patch panel, I guess it was called. Where they would, the call's coming in from A and wants to connect to B, and so the woman there would literally take a cable and connect, this, plug it into this hole in the patch panel to another one, and that connects to the called party, and and the circuit is complete. And so you've got, in that case, you've got an electrical circuit that is dedicated exclusively for that phone call for the entire duration of that phone call. And it's a pretty inefficient way to go about doing these things. Or if the call was, say, long distance, then the woman would then connect it over to a different panel that handled a trunk line that would connect a switch here to a switch over in the other city.
You get on the New York to London trunk line.
Now you're really talking.
Exactly.
Right? In fact, a long time ago, those would get about as far as somewhere on the East Coast, and then there would be some radio telegraphy going on. Yeah, because even though they had some rudimentary cables underneath the Atlantic, I think a lot of that, back in the 30s and 40s, there was a leg of that was actually done by radio.
Mm-hmm.
Be that as it may.
Right. It's incredibly inefficient is the point.
Totally. Right. Which is one reason why it was so darn expensive.
Right.
A lot of cost goes into building all that stuff. And so the supply was just so limited.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so that's circuit switching. Packet switching, which is basically how the internet works, is fundamentally different in that file, data, content, what you want to call it, whether it's a phone, a human voice conversation, or a video of what, Greg?
A cat.
A cat.
It's always a cat video.
Yeah, what's the cat doing? Right? Jumping on a dog or playing the piano.
Or someone getting hurt in some way.
Absolutely.
Like the internet just became America's funniest home videos.
So a skateboarder just eating it on concrete or something. Or, I don't know, or downloading an HTML page, whatever. Whatever that content is, ultimately that stuff gets sampled, it gets digitized, right, into just basically a whole long string of ones and zeros, which then gets sort of, kind of packaged up into what are called packets. And each packet then gets routed from the origin IP address to the destination.
But not unlike a phone number in a way. It's like it's got a number that's telling you where it goes.
The weird thing though with packet switching is that in theory anyway, those let's say just for giggles, you have 1,000 packets, right? You just send each of those packets could take its own unique path on its way to the destination, and at the destination they get reassembled.
Which is particularly amazing that we do that with video calls and whatnot.
Right. That's exactly
but it's
right.
fundamentally different than a voice call, which would by nature have to be your single path.
Exactly.
Right?
That's exactly right.
At the very inefficient rate that a voice goes over wires, right? So
yeah. So again, it's the circuit switching and the packet switching. It's funny, back in the mid '90s, I think, when as the internet sort of started taking over, there were two funny terms that would use between people who worked at the phone companies that worked on circuit switching and those that worked in packet switching. They're referred to as bellheads and bellheads and medheads. That's it.
Really,
yeah.
I've never heard that before.
Yes.
I'm gonna have to remember that.
Right.
Yeah.
For bellhead, if you were smart,
Right.
Cared about a future career, you would sort of teach yourself to become a net. Anyway.
All right, so we're sort of like maybe at the pre or early days of the internet. I remember this Simpsons episode from the first few seasons there. I guess this is like early '90s, where Bart makes a phone call to Australia, and the little boy on the other end like has to jump on his tricycle. It's like a prank call, I think. Jump on his tricycle to ask like his dad if the refrigerator is running or something, right? So
but they can't go
exactly, it's like through the outback, right? And so Bart racks up hours-long conversation to Australia, which ended up ruining The Simpsons financially. Why was voice so expensive, and what happened to change that?
Yeah, limited supply and limited number of operators at the time, right?
Right. So that limited supply is that you have 64 kilobits on a voice channel.
Yeah.
And the limited number of operators is that there was monopolies essentially for the reasons that you.
Yeah, and frankly, just a dearth of long distance, fiber cables that could handle, that could increase the supply of voice channels.
Right.
So yeah, it would have been just prohibitively expensive for it.
Whereas packets, like you can put packets going to 100 different purposes all together in the same stream, because on the same wavelength on one fiber or whatever, right?
International voice prices came way down in late '90s, late 2000s, due to mostly because of the wave of liberalization. Now, how they were building out their voice networks, it's not unrelated, but I think
So the first was liberal, which is a great point bringing up that our last meaningful legislation on telecoms at all in the United States was the 1996 Telecoms Act, which previously we had already broken up the Bell monopolies, the regional Bell companies and that sort of thing. But then in 1996, you came up with much more liberalization, like opening the market to competition and unbundling and things like that.
Yeah, and
that spread all over the world.
Yeah, and it spurred. That also spurred the development of mobile networks as well. It addressed, among other things, the siting of cell sites, of cell towers, where they could be built in municipalities. Municipalities could not just say, "No, you're not allowed to build any cell site here."
Right.
I only know this because I attended a lot of zoning hearings back when I worked for Nextel Communications. I'm dating myself right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to get too far.
No. That's actually interesting.
But no, the spur international calling was driven largely again by liberalization, both of the international markets and of the local markets as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So and including the developments of mobile operators.
Right.
So whereas once upon a time again you had Ma Bell as your phone company. Now those Ma Bell, there's probably another landline competitor, and there might have been 2 or 3 mobile operators as well, suddenly operating in your neighborhood, and they would compete on price and other services as well.
Yeah, I remember this. I'm making so many TV references. I remember this commercial where it's like this British American family, and they want to call grandma in London or whatever, and it's like they have like a schedule of like you can talk to her from 7 to 7:03, and then
that's right on Sunday for cheap.
Right, exactly.
But think about it, like why would they drop the price on calls on, say, weekends or in the evenings.
Or lower demand, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's
businesses aren't
absolutely.
Yeah.
That should tell you something, right?
Yeah.
That price discrimination, is that the term,
Yeah.
right? Where these networks that were built out, I suppose, for their peak hour, which back then would have been still like business customers, are laying unused on weekends and in the evening. So if you're on Sprint or whatever, well, why not try to make some money off of this by offering more attractive prices for social calling? Call your mom on Mother's Day.
Yeah.
Call your mom, right?
That's right. All right. So if you go read our TeleGeography report, which of course you should,
which everyone should do.
Yeah, absolutely. The first couple of sentences are going to start out essentially saying that voice is dying.
It's all very depressing, isn't it? Right?
Yeah.
What are we doing here?
People still like to talk to each other just as much, right? Like I know that texting is now. In fact, we were saying earlier that in the movie The Hangover, he says like, "Don't text me," right? And at that time, whatever that was, 15 some years ago, I was, I'm not going to text people. No, now that is the primary way of communication. Yeah, but even still, we still talk to each other.
But not when you're driving.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Never text and drive.
There's no reason to believe that we are talking to each other less, right? It's just the international long distance minutes are dropping, but that's different than saying that we are talking to each other less. I mean, something is taking up that the void there.
Right. So it's a technology difference.
It's a matter of technology and internet based apps that have that have become quite popular. So, for example, WhatsApp or Viber, and these all sort of started as texting apps. And again, it's not much of a leap to add a voice layer on top of that because, again, voice just doesn't take up that much bandwidth, right? And so we're seeing an ever increasing amount of, say, just of usage of these apps. Some of the data is actually kind of hard to come by. A lot of these companies stopped publishing numbers. Like WhatsApp used to publish just how many downloads there had been. Facebook bought them a couple of years ago, and those numbers are kind of hard to come by now. Same with, I think Viber might be the same way. I wrote down some other ones.
Or Skype. Skype, there was a time when Skype was the word you would use for an OTT voice call. Well, first tell us what OTT is and what the significance is.
So the term OTT is used a lot. It stands for over the top, right? We don't mean spectacular.
That was an over the top call.
Right. So over the top is kind of used. It's just kind of a pejorative. It's my opinion for a long time. Where, and Skype was really the first. Gosh, I remember when Skype was developed. It was
2003.
Something like that. Yeah, it was like, and it was something that you used on your computer, right?
Right.
It was an application that you ran on your computer.
You didn't even have phones with apps back then.
Right. And your buddy, would install it as well in his computer. Your buddy could be in the next town over or in Finland if you're in the US or whatever, right? But that was a classic example of where a couple of smart people got together and said, wait a minute, let's just convert the human voice into a bunch of ones and zeros. Estonian, right? Yeah. And send that over to just send that over the internet to your friend in another country, and that voice is being sent on an application that is writing on the internet. And the over the top part is that in many cases, your ISP and your friend's ISP through which you get internet was also the telephone company.
Right.
So they saw this as a threat. Like, well, wait a minute. Our bread and butter.
This cash cow, right?
Yeah, our bread and butter is like international phone calls. And wait a minute, you're just paying for your internet service, and you're going to use this application that mimics what our international long distance network does, but you're not going to pay us for that.
And to the operator of a network, a packet of voice looks just like any other packet.
Exactly. Yeah.
They can't price discriminate on that, because you can't even identify it.
Right. No, But even then, the threat that sort of computer-based Skype, for example, posed probably wasn't that great because, boy, you got to go get your computer and turn it on,
Right.
and you got to get
the novelty of having a video or whatever isn't the same as like being able to just call someone whenever you want to.
Right. Now the big accelerator, I think it's fair to say here, was the development not of mobiles per se, but of like 3G and then more importantly 4G and even 5G networks on your mobile, because now you've got more than enough access bandwidth on your mobile device, and if you can get those apps on your phone and just make them really easy to use.
And it's untethered. It'll notify you when you're getting a call, whereas like I'd have to plan out with my friend ahead of time, maybe let's get on Skype at this time so that you have Skype loaded or whatever. Yeah. Whereas this like essentially rings your phone just like it would.
That's right.
You know?
Yes. Yeah. And then I think that is really what has driven down the number of international call minutes delivered over the traditional long distance networks. Having said that, I mean, still, 380 billion minutes of international long distance.
So that means there's still 380 billion minutes of people picking up a traditional telephone that is completing a circuit to the other end. Or does it get more complicated?
It's a little more complicated than that. So I'm going to really confuse matters here, and I'll probably be the most confused out of all of them. So we kind of need to distinguish between the whole idea behind circuit switch and packet switch is getting really muddied now, right? Because the old circuit switch technology, while there's still some of it referred to as TDM technology, time division multiplexing equipment, which was designed designed around the human voice. Some of that is still in service because it's really good, it's really reliable, and it's paid for, right?
Which is why we have such funny numbers like 1.544 for T1.
Right.
Was a certain it was 24, 64 kilobits or something?
T1 is 1.544 megabits per second, which is 21 down. The Europeans a little differently now, Greg. You know, they use
TE1s or 2 megs.
But
it's not 2,000, it's 2,044. Right?
But the DS0 is a DS0 everywhere. Why? Because the human voice does
64
physics.
Yeah.
So just to make matters really confusing, even the traditional telephone companies are themselves incorporating IP, Internet Protocol, into their voice networks.
But that might happen in the middle or long haul segment. So let's say I'm a grandma and I still have an ISDN phone line in my house. Now ISDN complicates a little bit because it's an interstitial.
Why are you going there, man?
Yeah, so forget that. Just a twisted pair, right?
Yeah, okay. Yes.
And I pick up my twisted pair. That's still working the same way that you sort of suggested before. It's translating my voice into electric signals. But then it becomes VoIP somewhere later down the line?
It might.
Okay. But that's possible, right?
Yes.
So then maybe we need to back up a little bit and say, okay, there's something called VoIP, voice over IP.
Yeah.
And there's these apps that you were talking about.
Yeah.
Skype. Are those OTT? Are those different things?
So let's talk. We're kind of talking apples and oranges here. So so there's the technology side and there's kind of the commercial side.
Gotcha.
So the technology side, a lot of these international voice minutes that we tallied this for the year 2021, we came in about 380 billion minutes. A fair bit of that. Of those minutes is actually voice over IP. It's within the carrier's network.
Right.
And they're counting point A to point B, they're billing per minute.
Just like they would for a traditional thing.
Absolutely.
But I should say to the listeners, I'm learning here because I've never worked on the TeleGeography report in my entire time at TeleGeography.
How did you get away?
I know, right?
So in that regard, like it looks like a duck, it quacks like a duck, it's a duck, right? It's an international long distance minute that we count, even though the carriers in many cases, in most cases, have replaced a lot of their traditional circuit switch equipment with IP.
But we and the carriers are still counting that as traditional voice.
Correct.
As a separate category from the OTTs.
That's right.
That's right.
Yeah. So let's separate that out. So that all counts as international long distance. Why? Well, because it's reported by the carriers, and it is quote unquote circuit switch only in the sense that, again, it's point A to point B. The internet, we don't count minutes in the internet.
Right. You couldn't.
You can't.
It's diffused packets being routed randomly.
Right. Yeah. Whether the international carrier is using old circuit switch / TDM technology or their own voice over IP technology is irrelevant. We count that all as international voice minutes. The apps that are used, right, such as WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger or whatever, that's all over the internet. Right. It's just the internet. Think of that. It's just another app.
And to any monitoring service or anything would look just like a packet of anything else. Right. Yeah. Got it. And so when we're looking at that and we're saying like things are on the decline, we mean, sort of that even if it's VoIP in the middle or whatever, it's still metered by the minute. Right. Yeah. Right. So that started to decline if you go, as I did, to the executive summary of our voice report, that started to decline in 2015. And I found this really interesting. It said, for the first time since the Great Depression. Yeah. How do we know that?
Well, because there's this thing called the Federal Communications Commission, which was, now the FCC has tracked international, well, from the U.S. anyway, international voice traffic since the early 30s. And it has always trended, I guess, during the Great Depression when everybody was poor, it seemed. Nobody had
well, these international minutes were really expensive back then. So
that's right. And the overwhelming majority of the small volume of minutes would have been business and government anyway. Mm-hmm. Right. Although I wonder what the numbers look like during the war. I didn't actually bother. I should probably go back.
Surely
trended up a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah. So
2015 was the first year, and it was. Yeah. Because of these things that you're mentioning,
there's
OTT.
Yeah, there's no reason. Again, look, it's based on nothing else. On all of our prior years' data showing every year, like clockwork, the number of international minutes always. There's more people in the world, right? Right. Every year, and prices.
And they're more mobile than they used to be.
Yeah, that's right.
International, right?
Yeah, and prices come down. So everything we've been seeing for a long, long time, showing those international volumes trending upward, we have to assume that trend continues. It's just the manner in which we are talking to each other is changing.
Right. So if we had the data to plot conversation minutes, it would still be on that same trajectory, if not even increase. It's just, especially with the pandemic, it probably did increase quite a bit. Sure. It's just that what we see as metered voice minutes has gone down every year since 2015, along with revenue, I assume, right? So,
we necessarily have to make some assumptions here about overall voice traffic, but
and it's important to track that way because it is the revenue going away, right? So in the end, to suppliers of telecommunication services, broadband is broadband is broadband, and they get a certain ARPU. Which tell us what an ARPU is, I guess. But
it's like average revenue for you.
You don't use ARPU in broadband, so I just bring that up.
It's per unit, so it's typically used in mobiles.
So that what we're tracking that's on the decline is sort of these metered voice minutes that have a particular charge associated with them, going away to something that no one can really see, which is that it's getting routed just like any other internet traffic, right? So I have not read the TeleGeography voice report that often over the years, I'll admit, but I read it in anticipation of this episode, of course. And one thing that really struck me as fascinating about our work there, that it's a little bit disappointing is going to go away if this all gets subsumed into packet switch internet, right? But is there's like a human geography sort of democracy study inherent in our data that you look at like international traffic flows and you can look at migratory patterns and whatnot. So like what are some of the heaviest international traffic routes in the world, for example?
Well, it stands to reason, right? I mean, people call back to their families, right? So the biggest route in the world, and it has been for a long time, is the U.S. to Mexico.
neighbors, but also neighbors that have a lot of population exchange. Right?
Yeah, that's the issue. Yeah. There's a fairly close, as you're saying, correlation between country of origin, country of residence, I guess you would say, and international traffic flowing. But yeah, the U.S. Mexico is the largest international route in the world. UK to India, there's many people in the UK of Indian descent. There are a lot of in Germany. It's very interesting. There are a lot of immigrants, people living in Germany, either having immigrated or with family back in both Poland and Turkey, and those are a couple of the biggest routes in the world as well.
I know that because in Berlin, there's lots of great falafel stands and shawarma places.
Doner kebabs. One in the morning. And there are countries like in the Gulf, particularly like Bahrain or Qatar or the UAE. There are a lot of migratory workers there, and what's so interesting is the traffic imbalance between these places. People tend to call migrants from poorer countries who go to wealthier countries to find work will call back home. It doesn't go the other way.
Right, because they're making the money and maybe remittances back, whatever, so they're footing the bill. Right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So what's the future of voice then, Paul? I mean, we're going to keep seeing this decline and get subsumed into the internet, or does that do anything to data networks? I mean, you've said that voice takes up very little bandwidth. So
yeah, with regards to data networks, honestly, I don't think it has much of an impact at all. It's just it takes up very little resources. When we track international bandwidth deployments very, very closely, and the lion's share of we measure in terms of terabits or petabits of per second of bandwidth, and the lion's share of that is deployed by big hyperscalers like Google and Meta.
So the cloud is
it's these companies basically stitching together their data centers. Right? They need enormous pipes to stitch them together, and voice traffic being dumped onto at that scale, it just doesn't really move the needle. It's a droplet in the lake. It is. I mean, the thing to keep in mind is let's not lose track of scale here, though. I mean, we've the sort of the classic international long distance metered service. Sure, that the volumes are dropping quite a bit, and the revenues are dropping a lot as well. But still, like $50-some billion of revenue.
Okay, so that's what I really want to focus on. Is so in my world, it's often like, oh, when does MPLS disappear? And there was great proclamations that very soon, and not turning out that way. People still want to rely on that a little bit more. I assume that we keep tracking this. We're going to keep tracking that as long as people will pay us to, right? Yeah. But that it's diminishing, but not disappearing in a foreseeable time scale.
No, yeah. I mean, I was just looking earlier about the global revenues for say IP transit or for international private line is dwarfed by by the volume by the revenues of.
Well, partially because of what we're talking about, that a packet is a packet, and
I just find this so interesting. Another thing that I find really interesting is I feel less esoteric, anyway, is the persistence of telephone numbers. Right? Like there was a sense, I don't know, 15 years ago, maybe roughly.
Yeah, I have a handle. Everyone could find me through my digital ID in some other way.
Was going to take over. You know what? If you want, particularly any, most of these apps that run on your phone say WhatsApp. Do you use WhatsApp, Greg? I mean, sometimes
I do when I'm traveling internationally. That's the main use I get out of it.
Guess what? If you want someone to reach you on WhatsApp, you give them your telephone number.
It's true.
The same thing that your local company gives you.
Is that really important? I would think because so one of the downsides of something like Skype, or although Skype eventually I think did this as well, but sort of Facebook Messenger say or whatever, is that you need to have someone's handle and be connected to them and all this sort of thing, right? So whereas if you can just dial a phone number and you already have that, then did that lead to the greater popularity of the OTTs, being able to tie it to a phone number like that?
Oh, that's a really good question. I mean, I don't have a definite. It would make sense to me, right?
I mean, we can't track that, so we can't say for sure. Yeah.
And I think it's funny. Domestically, we don't think twice about calling each other, about giving each other our phone numbers, because phone calls are effectively free, right?
Right.
You buy service from your mobile operator for some outrageous amount of money because we're in the US. Sorry, we'll delete that. Okay. You buy mobile service from your operator here in the US, and you have a telephone number associated with your device, and so we don't think twice about giving our friends and our family.
But the volume doesn't matter, really. Essentially, it's a prepaid kind of thing.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, when's the last time you paid? I'm calling California. It's all you can.
I remember those days, but they were long in the past.
Right.
Yeah.
So we are all quite comfortable having a phone number. So we're not. I guess I don't speak for myself. I'm not terribly averse about giving our phone numbers to people in other countries as well. If you can get a hold of me, just hit me on WhatsApp, and here's my phone number.
Right.
Frankly, it's easier to remember than a lot of other things. Like if I had some sort of, I guess on a Skype handle, it's been a while since I've used it. I thought, what was it? I need a password, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Just use my phone number. Just text me or call me on WhatsApp.
Right, and like I said before, it will ring when that happens, and that's like a key feature of it. It can be somewhat unexpected, right? Yeah. So whereas in business communication now, so like if I'm going to do a Zoom or a Meet, that can literally only happen when you've already both agreed on a time.
Right?
So that is a fundamental change in the way that we communicate that I think in some ways never goes away, especially those on maybe more sales or that kind of thing where you might want to try to get a hold of someone without having already agreed to a time.
Right? Right. So, do you FaceTime much?
Not much, no.
No, I don't either.
With the kids with the grandparents, that's the primary use of FaceTime.
But even then, wouldn't you signal to your parents that hey, can we do a FaceTime?
Yeah, we would set it up. Yeah, because you don't want to you don't want to catch someone when they're indisposed in some way, right?
It's a similar. I don't know. Yeah. Similar dynamic to what you're describing.
Yeah.
Like Zoom or whatever.
Yeah, if it's unannounced, I will dial a phone number.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Which makes a separate conversation. It makes me think that video calling kind of has a bit of an upper bound. For that very reason. You don't just sort of randomly.
You have to be prepared with your tableau and your appropriate clothing.
That's right.
So the upshot, Paul, there is that we're going to keep doing the TeleGeography voice report, and carriers are going to keep offering voice service, I think, for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, and as like any business, I suppose that sees that has reached peak revenue and sees revenues coming down. There's been a lot of consolidation. That's what happens. That's natural, right? Right. And there's a whole other portion of this which we really haven't touched on at all, which is the international wholesale market. There's this whole thing we could do if we have time for it, whatever.
Terminating voice minutes.
It's one of there's always been sort of a market for like a middleman, because if you think about it, if there's 200 roughly countries in the world, 180 countries, whatever, a lot of countries in the world, and
depends on how one counts. That's complicated,
right? But in there's no one carrier in the world that can connect all of the country pairs, right? So there's this big industry of wholesale operators that sort of sit in the middle. Well, for example, if someone in Chile wants to speak to someone in Pakistan, that's
an unusual pairing, so it takes a lot of coordination.
So I strongly suspect I don't know for that, but I strongly suspect there is no one Chilean operator that has direct interconnection to Pakistan. So they will go to companies like Vodafone or Claro or Tata.
Who are also, just to be clear, who are also retail voice operators, but they have wholesale termination.
Some of them, some of them are. Some of them are exclusively wholesale, like iBase. So, and one of the really funny things is that it's not, and even the wholesale operators, they don't necessarily have connections in every country as well. So if you call from, again, I don't know why I picked Chile and Pakistan, just totally random. A call from, say, Chile to Pakistan may actually traverse the, 3 or 4 or more networks to get from point A to point B.
Right.
And that's a whole business that we track in the report as well. And then that's an industry that is really consolidated in the last 4 years. It's at this point, if you don't have scale, you're not going to make money.
Right.
So a lot of companies have joined together. A lot of companies have gotten out of the business with the margins. In order to make margin, you need huge scale.
So it's a volume business.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. In order to you're eking out tenths of a cent per minute. But if you do that, at
billions of times,
you can make a workable business.
Yeah. And with that, we should wrap up without getting too into the weeds.
But Greg, I want to talk about mobile termination.
Oh yes, absolutely. So we'll do that for sure. But in wholesale sort of termination, what does their physical infrastructure look like? Like how do they need to own these wires? Are they leasing wires from the other stuff that we cover at TeleGeography? A wholesale operator. So wholesale operators, the service they offer is termination. And what does that mean specifically?
Yeah. Well, that's a great question, right? It took me a while to figure out. So let's say, I'm going to name it. Wholesaler A, we'll call them. They will offer a list of termination to, 50 countries and maybe to multiple operators within those countries. So say Austria may have, 3 or 4 mobile operators. Then they offer termination to 3 of those operators.
Different and also exchange carriers within those.
Yeah. So they'll say, hey, mobile operator in Chile, if you need, if your customers are calling Brazil, we can give us your traffic. We will terminate it in Brazil for you. So you don't have to arrange an interconnection.
I see. So you don't have just like you said, they're a middleman where I don't need telecom company A in this country to talk to telecom company B in that country. We'll pick it up from you and take care of it.
That's right. And so they have to have arrangements with those carriers inside, Brazil, right? And they'll have physical interconnections, but they don't. That wholesale operator does not literally carry the call to the end customer. Rather, they carry
to their exchange.
Yeah, to the operator. So let's say the end customer is mobile operator C in Brazil. They'll interconnect with mobile operator C in Brazil, and mobile operator C will then take it to the customer.
All right. So at the risk of sounding really stupid, does this happen in what we now call data centers, like colo facilities, or does this? Where does this physically happen?
Yeah, back before there was an internet, there were these, the telephone companies built out central offices.
60 Hudson Street.
Yeah, big, absolutely, big switching centers. And many of those switching centers sort of, as the internet developed, tacked on
the data port.
Equipment for routers and switches and stuff.
Interesting. All right, so mobile termination.
Oh, great.
How is that? So I'll start with this in the sense of when you're talking about telecoms with a layperson, one of the things that they really don't get is that 90% of everything you do happens on wires, including mobile calls, right? So the only mobile part of my mobile call is from my mobile to the nearest tower, which is usually pretty close. Right? So what happens from there? What is
Those of us who once worked as radio frequency engineers for mobile offering spent a lot of time on the roofs of office buildings and apartment buildings and various. So no, you're absolutely right. It's not magic. It's not the ether connecting your mobile to
most people think it's bouncing up to a satellite somewhere.
No. There's literally radio transmitter and receiver in your phone, at an extremely low power. So but you're in communication with it's funny we call it a cell tower, but a tower, literally a tower. More accurately, we determine as a cell site.
Right.
And
because they're not usually on towers, but just tops of buildings, like you said.
Yeah, and if you're driving on the interstate in some rural parts of of the country, or you'll see these big lattice towers looming off in the distance, and you'll see, if you look really closely, you'll see sets of antennas. They don't look like your typical whip antennas. They look like panels, so like these white rectangular things. And those antennas are connected to equipment down at the base of these towers by coaxial cable, typically 3/4 inch.
All right.
Coaxial cable, maybe 500 inch, 500. And that equipment is then connected to the rest of the world by typical fiber.
Yeah.
Back when I was doing it, it was T1s and T3s. Yeah. But so really the only wireless portion is just that small bit from your phone to that cell site. And again, in a dense urban core where we are now, that might be a matter of a couple hundred feet. If you're out in rural areas, it could be 5 miles, 10 miles or more.
But then from there, does it just look to our data, to the telephone company, like a phone call?
Absolutely. Okay. Absolutely. It's just like anything else at that point. The issue of termination, of mobile termination, is really interesting. When you make a phone call to, it works for fixed telephones as well. If we'll restrict this to international. Let's say you're in Germany, right? And I'm in the U.S. and I'm calling you on your mobile. And let's say you're thank you. And let's say you're a Deutsche Telekom customer, or whatever the brand is, T-Mobile, whatever they call it in Germany, the mobile arm of it. And I want to call you. I pay for those minutes. The trick is that the network that you're on has a monopoly.
The mobile nature
has a monopoly over the service known as mobile termination. If I want to call you, I have no choice but to run through your network to connect that call. And in theory, your mobile operator could say, "Great, I'm going to charge you $1 a minute, to bring that call to Greg Bryan."
And that's because, unlike wires, there's a physical limitation of wavelengths, frequencies we can use. Is that?
No, that's not the issue. I mean, it's just
monopolies.
It's just monopoly. Because it's the same issue if you're fixed. Right? If you're fixed telephone customer, it's the same thing. The end customer, your service provider will be like, I'll connect your call. Right?
If you're listening, you miss Paul's middle finger.
And on the mobile side, for a while, regulators were actually kind of okay with that because they wanted to encourage the build out of mobile networks.
We need revenue to build towers and get coverage everywhere.
Yeah, and so mobile operators are allowed to charge pretty high fees.
Which is why years ago, if you drove into Canada, or if you're in Western Europe, this probably happened a lot more than it did for us. Like all of a sudden you're roaming and you're like, "Don't call me, I'm roaming," right? Or even within a domestic market, if you switch to another carrier, roaming charges were also there, right? So, all right, so we've talked about the whole history of telecoms. Really, it's been fascinating up to where we are now and watching the decline. First, I mentioned before that we're still continuing to track this. Do we have an update of the report coming out?
The report was just released right around the new year.
Oh, well, that's why our producer Jane asked me to do this.
Absolutely. That's right. And there's been one or two blog posts about it. I think, is it
blog.telegeography.com? That'll do.
That'll do, yeah.
And if people want to keep track of you specifically, they can find you on LinkedIn.
Absolutely. Paul Brodsky. TeleGeography.
Excellent.
I look forward to hearing from you.
And next time, what should we talk about?
Oh, boy. I like talking about fiber. I like talking about cable. I like talking about fiber optics. I like talking about internet bandwidth deployments in places like Africa and the Middle East. I'm heading to exciting Dubai early in March for a capacity conference there.
Nice.
Yeah. I'll be sure to bring home some Turkish delight or whatever you want.
Excellent. All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Great.
All right.
Next time.
Cheers. Thanks for listening. TeleGeography Explains the Internet comes from the experts here at TeleGeography. It's edited and produced by Jane Miller, and it's hosted by me, Greg Bryan. And I also wrote that theme song you're listening to right now. To learn more about our data, jump over to telegeography.com and we'll see you on the internet.